As you look at defining CAPEX and OPEX, you got to get to the real words. When you talk CAPEX, you're talking capital expenditures. When you talk OPEX, you're talking operating expenditures. So in business, you got all sorts of ways in which you spend money. All we're talking about when we say capital expenditures versus operating expenditures is how are you spending that money. So operating expenses refers to your day-to-day expenses, stuff like labor, utility cost, sometimes they'll refer to them as period costs. Versus capital expenditures, where you're taking your cash and you're investing in long-term investments. This would be stuff like buildings, equipment, vehicles, and even intangible assets such as software, patents, these things. So anything I'm going to invest in for my business that's a multi-year use, I'm going to use it longer than a year period of time, I'm going to end up capitalizing that. They call it capital expenditures. When a company determines how they're going to spend their money, they have their period costs. Those are the budgets that they set up every single year for their operating groups. Capital expenditures is where we're going to take our extra money and invest it to grow and expand our business. Operating expense is the easiest to find. You're going to see that on the income statement. Basically, all your period costs, you got your revenue minus all your labor, all your operating, all the cost to build the product, what they call cost of goods sold, any overhead costs, selling expenses, all going to be in your income statement. Capital expenditures, you're going to see it on the balance sheet because you're adding to it. Like if I go build a new building, that's going to go on my balance sheet as an asset. I may have liabilities against that, but on my balance sheet, it'll be one of my assets. Now over time though, you actually depreciate the value of those assets every single year, and that ends up hitting your income statement, what they call depreciation amortization. But most time when you think of capital projects or capital investments, all that's going to start on the balance sheet, and over time you're going to reduce the value of those assets based upon your depreciation or amortization schedules. So the difference between capital expenditures and operating expenditures is timing. Any purchases or investments you make that are greater than a year period of time are going to be capitalized. Anything less than a year period of time, or what we call your period costs, stuff like labor, overhead expenses, utilities, etc., those are going to be your short-term expenses, and that's going to be your operating expenses. Business, you need to know where you're spending your dollars. Basically, as you look at CAPEX versus OPEX, there's two different types of budgets or two different allocation of dollars that you got to be tracking towards. It's important for you to understand as an individual, because you'll hear it talked about. We got these capital budgets, or we got operating budgets. You'll be asked, are you going to expense this as an operating expense or a CAPEX? To understand, how should I allocate those dollars or those expenses, make sure I'm recording them correctly so it gets the information that our executives want, is vitally important in any business. So the more you understand about the difference between capital budgets or capital expenditures being long-term investments versus your day-to-day expenses, what you call your operating expenses, and make sure you're allocating them well, it'll set you apart as a manager within the organization, that you truly understand what we're trying to do as a business and how to expense those dollars.